I want to begin this video for AP GovPol by going over the timeline of how government developed and why the United States government developed the way they did. I want to go back to the Middle Ages when it started with the fall of the Roman Empire around the year 500 AD. At that time, the Roman Empire was the controlling force in the Middle East, the entire Mediterranean basin, and throughout Europe, insofar as even in England. And when the Roman Empire collapsed, it started the Dark Ages. There was a lot of local feudal control, and there were no great centralized powers. During this time, around 800 to 1000 AD was a time of Viking exploration, where the Vikings went on raids in the northern hemisphere. But the Viking tribal chiefs got together once a year and developed what they call an all-thing, where the tribal chiefs got together and said, here are the big decisions that we have to make for our nation. That's sort of a primitive beginning to what we now call a Congress or a parliament. It was after this 1,000-year period that a Viking descendant invaded England, and that was William of Normandy. Invaded England in 1066 AD, conquered England castle by castle, the whole thing. Set himself up as William I, the new king of England, and every one of the castle lords was replaced with his army captains. And so there was an entire new noble class and now a centralized government in England. Then his great-grandson, after the year 1200, almost 150 years later, rose to power. His name was King John. He's referred to as Evil King John. In the Robin Hood lore, they would have called him Evil Prince John. He rose to become king, and during that period of time, he alienated a lot of the noblemen. He raised their taxes. When they couldn't pay taxes, he would seize the land. He was known as an inveterate liar. He had 17 children, only 5 of them by his wife, because he would borrow the noblemen's daughters and wives and not always give them back. So he developed, there was a lot of animosity developed against him, and the 25 nobles gathered together with their armies and had a meeting with the king just outside of London and said, either sign this document and live this way with the official seal, or we will kill you and put your blood on the document. And the king agreed, Evil King John agreed to sign and put his seal on this document called the Magna Carta, the Great Charter. And what did it say? The king must follow the law. And we get that principle today where the government has to actually follow the law. I can't make it up as they go along. Second thing is that the nobleman must agree to any tax increase. And where we get that principle today is no taxation without representation. The king or the executive simply can't increase taxes if they want to. You have to have agreement of the people. Another principle, and there were 63 of them under the Magna Carta, another principle was that everyone was entitled to a jury trial of their peers. The king could not simply be the accuser, the prosecutor, the judge, and the jury, and the executioner. There had to be a more balanced civil process for crimes. And so the king had to agree to this. He didn't like it. He agreed to it, and then went home and developed an army and tried to fight it for a year before he died. And so when his son took over, it was already agreed to, this Magna Carta, and it became a foundation for English in English law. Now let's jump ahead 474 years later. You have many other kings in England, and this one rose to power, which was King James II. By now the American colonies were in place, and King James II was also evil. Now the colonies were largely self-governing in a local way. In Virginia, the first permanent English colony had its own rules called the House of Burgesses, a representative government, like a town council, if you will. That was designed in England. Then 10 years later, in 1619, 1620, came the Plymouth colony. They developed their own rules, the Mayflower Compact, and they operated under the authority of the king, but were locally self-governing. So and the colonies grew up largely self-governing in that sense. There were some that were more directly ruled by the king, but largely American colonies were self-ruled. However, in 1688, 1689, there was a revolution in England. The old king, James II, was not well liked by either the colonists in America or the English or the Parliament, and they kicked him out, and they brought in his daughter and son-in-law to be the new king and queen. But the daughter and son-in-law had to sign what we call the English Bill of Rights. The English Bill of Rights, 1689, had to be agreed to by the new king and queen of England for them to become the most powerful and wealthiest couple on earth. This English Bill of Rights was a large restatement of the Magna Carta. However, the English Bill of Rights did not apply to Englishmen that moved to America. After all, they were American colonials. They didn't deserve, so the English thought was, to have the same rights and privileges that the Englishmen did. Well, this didn't set well with Americans. Later, in 1776, a conflict was brought to a head, and the United States developed the Declaration of Independence, basically a divorce petition from the United Kingdom from British rule. And Thomas Jefferson drafted the first draft of this Declaration of Independence that laid out all the reasons why these 13 colonies should reject the King of England as a ruler, reject Parliament, and establish their own country and countries, 13, and establish their own self-rule. It was a 5-year war in which the American colonies prevailed. During that time, the government of these 13 colonies, this united government, was called the Articles of Confederation. There were 13 members of the Congress, 1 vote from each colony. And in order to change the rules, change the Articles of Confederation, they would have to all agree. And there were problems with this Articles of Confederation, and we'll take that up in the next video.